Hello, listeners and viewers. Welcome to another edition of CHP Talks. We are here today with a very special guest from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Kris Sims is with us from BC, and we are going to be talking today about our national deficit and debt and the financial issues that this country is facing. So, Rod, why don't you give her a proper introduction?
Well, Kris Sims, thank you for joining us today. Kris is the BC Director of the Canadian Taxpayer Federation. She's a longtime journalist in Canada. She's been one of the founding reporters at Sun News Network, and she's worked in and around government for more than 20 years. And so thank you, Kris, for being with us today.
Thank you.
And of course, Canadian Taxpayers Federation, I'll give a quick plug right at the start here. My wife and I have been members for years. We get the magazines, and we appreciate the work of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, exposing corruption, lies, wasteful spending, and unnecessary and painful taxation on people. So we appreciate you and the rest of your colleagues, and over the years, the work that's been done by Canadian Taxpayers Federation. It's a special treat to have you with us today.
Thank you. That means a lot to us. We've been around for almost 30 years. We're coming up on our 30-year anniversary, and I'm very fortunate to work for such a wonderful organization. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, how long have you been with the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, and what got you involved in that?
Great question. I'm coming up on 3 years, so it'll be 3 years at the end of this month. And I got involved with them because, as you mentioned, I was a journalist for a long time. I've worked everywhere from CTV to Sun News. And while I was at Sun News, I also wrote for the national newspaper chain for Sun Media. And quite often, our mandate was to afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. And that also meant, I always loved that line. David Aiken said that to me once when he was my bureau chief. I've always really tried to go after wasteful spending, even as a reporter. And so quite often, being a girl from small town, rural Canada, we were always very careful with our money growing up. And then I moved to Ottawa, and I just looked to the left and right and saw waste everywhere. And I couldn't believe that some people who were making more than $100,000 a year were still expensing their coffee and muffin every day and making taxpayers pay for it. It was outrageous. And so quite often I would reach out to the Canadian Taxpayers Federation and say, hey, I found this spending, or I've got this receipt, or I got this ATIP back, access to information request. And they were always so on the ball. What an excellent group for advocacy. And they were always pinch hitting for the little guy all the time and defending taxpayers. It's just something I deeply, personally admired. And so when the job came up here in British Columbia, the notion of coming back to my home province was a dream, like actually a dream. So I'm counting my blessings every day. That's how I landed with the Canadian Taxpayers Federation.
I noticed on your bio that you have been a taxpayer yourself since the age of 12. So you know the pain
Yes.
of paying taxes, and I'm glad that you are an advocate for that. Today we wanted to focus on, or get your thoughts on, this $343 billion deficit that has been recently unveiled in the midst of several other crises going on, crises and scandals. So maybe you can just launch in and tell us what you know about that particular number.
I just need to say right off the top, 2020 has been quite a year. It's been troubling for many people for many different reasons. And so I just wanted to take a moment to give pause and say, I know it's tough. A lot of people need a lot of kindness right now. So we're trying to be as gracious as we can be and as patient as we can be. So that being said, this deficit, now that we've gotten a look at it, is troubling. My colleague, our federal director, Mr. Aaron Woodrick, he's done incredible work on this file. And he just recently told us in our CTF podcast that the last time the deficit went up by this amount of money, it took 28 years. Now it's gone up in 1 year. That's startling. And that also means that our debt, if you go to debtclock.ca, is going up more than $10,000 a second.
Mm.
We're going to run out of room on our debt clock. So quite often we'll have big things like props. You know, I have a 30-foot tall balloon man that I use out here in British Columbia, and federally we have a national debt clock, and we pull it around behind a pickup truck every now and then to remind people of what we owe, both federally and provincially. We don't have room on it now. Once that thing hits $1 trillion, we're going to have to tape a 1 up next to it. And while that sounds silly off the top, it really represents something very important, and we need to get on top of this. We need to pull this deficit horse back. We need to lean into the stirrups and really pull back on the reins, because we're going to be paying for this. Our grandchildren are going to be paying for this if we don't stop this wasteful spending.
Yeah, that's excellent. I just put up the debt clock for a minute there, and people can go to debtclock.ca. That's one of the wonderful tools created by taxpayers that can show you. It's kind of sad to look at it, but it's a work of art as far as revealing what's going on behind the scene. I think it says that we are going deeper into debt at about $940 million a day, nearly $1 billion a day right now.
It is. It's scary. I know it's scary to look at, and it's hard for anybody. Dealing with your own personal debt and questions of debt is tough to look at, but we have to. We really have to, and we need to take hope. There are chances of turning this thing around. You know, Alberta went through very tough times, and when Premier Ralph Klein was there, remember when he held up the sign, paid in full? Yes. You know, this is possible, but we really need to do a lot of work to get there.
Yeah.
I think that it was the debt clock that caught me on to the Canadian Taxpayers Federation at some point in my probably in my teen years, and so it's an effective prop. It's something that I always associate with the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. So thanks for your work on that. We should maybe talk a little bit about the other scandal that the government is under close scrutiny, and that's the We scandal. That we as a charity. Capital W, capital E, not just the pronoun, but an actual charity or so-called that seems to be extremely friendly with the Liberals.
Yes, this is something we need to take a really close look at. The mandate of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation is lower taxes, less waste, and more accountable government. So by accountability, we mean transparency. So that means if you're using taxpayers' dollars for anything, we don't care if it's a limousine or to help bring clean water to people, you need to have that accounted for, because it's our money. Every nickel of it is our money, and it's our responsibility to be transparent and accountable. And this is where our alarm bells are ringing now with this current situation. So to back this up clearly, this money, $900 million, was set aside within this budget, this very, very big and spendy budget, to help young people get jobs, various types of different jobs. Fine. We think that was an awful lot of money to spend on such a thing, but fine. Almost always, those things are handled within government. Keep in mind, we have 37 cabinet ministers, 39 parliamentary secretaries, plus all their political staff, plus all of their bureaucrats working underneath them in their departments. We have tens of thousands of people working in Ottawa, but for some inexplicable reason, they outcontracted this. They farmed it out to an outside agency with no good reason given. Apart from that, they did sole sourcing for it. They didn't even send out the tender saying, hey, we've got $900 million to ladle out across Canada for some reason to young people. We need an organization to do the ladling. They didn't even put that out there. They just rubber stamped it over to this group. Now, the third layer of this is, as you point out, this group has very close, deep personal ties with the Prime Minister of Canada and his family members. As has been pointed out, we've got, the Prime Minister's mother and the Prime Minister's brother. When you combine those two speakers, they've made more than $300,000 in speaking fees through the interconnectivity of this big group. And there's many different elements to the We charity and the We groups. So there's all sorts of smoke here. And so we absolutely are calling for the Auditor General to take a deep dive and examine every single instance of payment or a contract or an agreement with any of this we entity and the current government dating back to 2015, because we need some serious accounting going on here.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you think about it, I mean, 900 million, that's a huge number. And then you go back to the debt clock, we're going deeper in debt by over 900 million every single day. So this is one example of that, but it's a big one. And because of the personal ties, not only to the Prime Minister and his family, but to Finance Minister Bill Morneau, who also sat in on the decision, did not recuse himself, acted as if this was just a normal decision-making process, and yet his family is involved with it as well.
This is why we also need them both to appear at the ethics committee, because a lot of folks may not realize, I'm sure lots of your folks do, but a lot of folks in Canada don't realize the power of committees. So in the United States, we are often treated to spectacles of committees, but they actually serve a very good purpose. It makes you swear under oath, you're on the record, it's live television, it's recorded, it's all translated into whatever language you need it to be on, and it's all on the record. That's how you examine questions of these types. We have that power here in Canada, and in a really good way. Committees are made up of all parties. They all have to be recorded. They all have to be translated. You can be summoned before a committee. They have a lot of power, and they have a lot of investigative tools. And so we need anybody who's been involved in government with this group to come before the ethics committee and answer questions for Canadians. And we all should be able to watch.
Yeah, an aspect of this too, is that we're a small political party. We don't get any taxpayer money. The big parties, the Conservatives and Liberals and the NDP all get millions of dollars of taxpayer money, as well as, basically it's the free coverage from the CBC that they dole out quite liberally. But to the use of taxpayers' money to essentially buy votes, that's a big concern of ours. Canada talks about free and fair elections, an open and transparent election process, and yet something like this, currying favor with a particular group, whether it's young people that need the jobs and they appreciate, that they're able to get the job, and then they're a little bit maybe indoctrinated, or through a we charity and the connections with the Prime Minister, they basically get a very favorable impression of, the Prime Minister, the Liberal Party, and so on, using our money, taxpayer money, to build that bridge. And it's pretty painful. We see where our money is going to CBC, for instance, whatever it is, 1 billion dollars a year. Now the 595 million that went to some of the other media outlets to basically promote the liberal worldview, and of course it works against us. So it's using taxpayers' money to buy votes, and when we're going into debt, our grandchildren are going to be paying for that vote buying scam. And that's one thing we call taxation without representation. They are nobody in their generation is getting to vote on whether or not they're going to spend money in our day to accomplish certain political objectives. So it's quite a tangled web.
It really is. And you make a good point that really is taxation without representation, because number one, they can't vote. And number two, in some cases, they haven't even been born yet, but they're going to have to be paying these bills. And third, they weren't being fair and open and honest about it when they were campaigning. I don't know any politician that campaigns on the idea of handing out taxpayers' money to favored groups. They'll say something like, oh, we need to boost the economy here and there, or we need to encourage this or that, but they don't come out and say, I'm going to rubber stamp $900 million contracts to a charity that I favor within my family. Please vote for me. Yeah. That's not part of their Transparency Act. And so that's where we think both the Auditor General, when it comes to the dollars and cents, needs to look at this, and the Ethics Committee to examine the questions you just raised here needs to examine this as well. Because where does influence start and stop? Where is this actually campaigning and electioneering? I don't know if you saw the TV commercial or the video commercial that was made showing Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and it was made by the We Group, and it was a fan video, huge fan video. And again, we would say exactly the same thing if this were Prime Minister Stephen Harper that was in charge and this were some magical conservative connected charity. If taxpayers' money is going to these sorts of things, it needs to be accounted for and it needs to be answered for.
That's one thing I've always appreciated about the taxpayers is you come as close as anybody does to being nonpartisan. I think you do hold politicians' feet to the fire no matter which party they're from, and we really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Very much so. Yeah. And just wanted to circle on back. We'll try to post the link to that commercial that you were talking about in the, at least in Facebook, because that is an important point. They were already scratching his back just before the last election. And so he's probably returning the favor. I can't really prove that offhand, but it looks a lot like it.
I must just say, I've covered Justin Trudeau before he was Prime Minister and just after he had become Member of Parliament. I've spoken with him dozens of times. Very friendly person. Guy has got serious charisma. And I must say, when I was covering him all through Atlantic Canada, the feeling coming from young people is genuine. I would be at a farmer's market or a mall. This person would be mobbed by young people. They want to take pictures with him. They want to have autographs taken. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before. And I'd covered politics for 20 years. So that connection with young people and being kind of a celebrity spokesperson, that's real. The question we have here is taxpayers' money. You can be as friendly as you like. That's fine. You can have family who do speaking engagements. Again, fine. But you need to be upfront if our money is being used. That's where it's not okay.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. Yeah, I think that the young people, though, of today who maybe are mobbing him and really like him, once they hit an age of paying a lot more income taxes, may suddenly have a bit of their eyes open and realize just how much of that money that they're sweating to earn is being scraped off by paying interest on debt for things that they didn't even get to enjoy, right?
And then the bill comes. Yes, yeah. Always. It's always a party until the bill shows up.
Yeah. Well said.
Kris, do you think this 343 billion is a final number? I mean, is it possible that number even grows by budget time next year?
It could very well. And I don't like to say that. I wish I could say the opposite. I wouldn't even call it an update. They called it a snapshot, which was a little bit cute for our taste, but fine, we'll take what we can. We wanted more of a real update, a fiscal update. They've got, like we said, armies and armies of bureaucrats, and some of them very hardworking within Finance Department and Revenue Canada. They can do these books and they can do them remotely. They don't need to physically be in the office. We wanted a more substantive fiscal update. I know my colleague Aaron Woodrick certainly said that. So we're bracing ourselves. We think we'll have a better picture of exactly what we owe on that big old debt clock coming up in the fall. But it really has a sense of people are kind of bouncing around for the summer and not giving us real numbers right now.
And the other question is, right now there isn't a lot of revenue coming in because of the COVID lockdown, which nobody is blaming the Prime Minister for that in any way, shape, or form. It's something that has happened to us, although, the shutdown of businesses across the country and the CERB, the emergency funds being doled out, there's some question about, how that's being managed. But the big point is, how do we recover from this, with as little, keeping our losses as low as possible. We need to get businesses going again. We need to have revenue, and part of that, thinking of energy and pipelines. We won't go deeply into that. It's a big topic, but do you have any comments about how we can get the resource sector going again and what needs to happen so that we have some revenue coming from that stream?
That's a great question. And other groups have done some pretty important recovery plans. I can think of things like the Fraser Institute, groups like that have really thought thoroughly about this. And we have as well. And in a nutshell, we need to do the opposite of what we were doing before COVID hit. So if that is unstrangling pipelines, not allowing for the blockade of our railways and our port systems, not angering our closest trading partner for no reason and getting them all riled up, there's all sorts of things that we need to do much more smartly after this, because frankly, we weren't in a good financial position before the COVID-19 pandemic health crisis hit. We were eating our seed corn. So the times were good. The American economy was on fire. It's picking back up again now. When that's happening south of the border, we should be doing really well too. There's no reason why we should have been running deficit budgets. Absolutely not. And frankly, the Prime Minister promised us a balanced budget by 2019. When he was first elected, that's what he said he was going to do. And he was going to run little itty bitty deficits. Well, he was running huge deficits. And again, for no coherent reason. There wasn't a global health pandemic then. There wasn't a massive recession crashing down around us. There wasn't, God forbid, a huge natural disaster that had hit us. Mm-hmm. We try to be reasonable at the Taxpayers Federation. When we say all things being equal, you need to balance the budget. Well, things were better than equal at the time. There was no reason for them to have been frivolously wasting all that money and going into debt. And so we were in a really bad position when that hit. And so we need to have a complete 180 on that thinking. They need to make sure that they allow for our natural resources to get out to market. So no more strangling Energy East, no more foot dragging on Kinder Morgan, no more constant foot dragging on Trans Mountain. To give you an idea, when Kinder Morgan was trying to get the pipeline twinned between Edmonton and Burnaby, so it runs, right through basically my backyard here in the Fraser Canyon, they were trying for years. They had 5 years of green lights, approvals from different levels of government, both provincial and federal. But this federal government foot dragged so long that a private company that was going to bankroll every nickel of it, wasn't going to cost taxpayers a thing. They were going to employ people for, $100,000 a year, give or take. And we mean real jobs. These are pipe fitters. These are crane operators. These are oil and gas workers, heavy duty salaries coming here. They foot dragged so long that private company threw its hands in the air and said, here, you take it. And so now taxpayers own this thing. And I think last time I checked, it cost us around $12 billion. That's just one example of unnecessary, boneheaded spending that happened before COVID. So frankly, they need to do the opposite of all of those things. They need to make sure that when it's environmentally responsible and they get all the proper approvals, that these projects get done. Stop foot dragging on them. And for goodness sake, don't allow our ports and our railways to be blockaded for weeks on end that then stymies up these jobs and stymies up the economy. And then hopefully we'll be able to get things back on track. We usually will say the government needs to do as little as possible, get out of the way and have low taxes and allow people, entrepreneurs and human enterprise to take care of this. And if they do that, we think it will be able to dig out of this hole.
Yeah, very good. I just want to put in a little plug for the CHP here, that we historically and still do have a policy of mandatory balanced budgets. And
nice.
How that is applied, of course, you have to be in there to be able to, walk that through. But we believe that it's critical for government, whoever's in power, to take their responsibility seriously. I mean, it's if you have to spend more money, you have to be honest with the people and go to them and say, like, we need more taxes. But we think there is huge amount of fat that can be cut off because, we wouldn't use taxpayers' money to buy votes. That's essentially what it boils down to. So.
Very wise, and we appreciate that. Anybody who says we want to see balanced budgets will give you a very good hearing, sir. So that's very good to hear. And to really put a point on it, just to give you an example, between the year 2013 and coming up in 2023, so they can project fiscally this way, we use the Parliamentary Budget Officer's numbers, their own numbers, and just in federal taxes, we lost out on $13 billion because we don't have our proper pipeline capacity. That's not royalties. That's not anything else. That was just the amount of federal taxes that would have otherwise been paid into the coffers of the federal government if they had allowed these pipelines to go through. That's hospitals, that's schools, that's paying down the debt, that's eliminating a carbon tax. That's all sorts of things that they could have done if they just would have picked their feet up and moved things along.
Yeah. I think last year during the campaign, we were using a number I think is fairly close, that Canada was spending about $70 million a day on interest on the debt. Of course, that will go up dramatically. And if with inflation and rising interest rates, I mean, right now interest rates are at an all-time low. If interest rates go up, that's going to be a huge burden, and I can think of a lot better uses for $70 million or $100 million a day than paying interest to global financiers.
Those of us who are old enough to remember the original NEP and high interest rates of the early 80s, I keep trying to remind some of my younger colleagues, saying these low interest rates weren't the norm back in the early 80s, and things were really tough then. We don't want to go back there, so we need to get our act together.
Yes. I also want to just circle back and remind everyone of that point you made about saving during the good times because bad times come. And we saw, I think most of us know that, those of us who've been raised in families, we know that you've got to save during the good times. So if you have that common sense perspective, check out the Taxpayers Federation and check out CHP. These fiscal policies of being responsible today with everything that we're given are very much in common of both of these organizations. And we probably disagree on something, but on these the big things of paying down debt and not leaving that to our kids and grandkids is a major point that we're both harping on. So
I encourage anyone listening or watching to go to taxpayer.com and check out their various things they have going. They have so many issues on the go, and they have a podcast. How long has the podcast been going, Kris?
We're on episode 15 now. It's been a long time dream of mine and my colleague, Todd McKay. He's the Prairie Director. I come from a major radio background. I was in talk radio for many years. And so the idea of getting a Canadian Taxpayers podcast off the ground really meant a lot to us. So we're on episode 15 now.
Okay, and we're somewhere in the same ballpark. We've been doing the CHP Talks on Facebook for a little time, and we just last month started doing it as a podcast. We just take our video and take the video out of it, just leave the audio and put it up as a podcast. And I listen to podcasts myself because you can do it while you're driving or you're working in the garden or whatever else you're doing. And I kind of like that being able to just get the audio as well. So
isn't the technology wonderful? I mean, really, I think we should take a moment and say this is really amazing.
Yeah, and everybody has gotten more proficient in Zoom and those types of things due to COVID. So I guess that's a little silver lining. So your podcast is also available right on the front page of taxpayer.com, debtclock.ca, and chp.ca is where you can find us, anyone who's listening in or watching this broadcast. Peter, any final thoughts?
Well, I was just going to ask Kris that. Did you have anything that you wanted to leave with our viewers and listeners, and before we sign out?
I just wanted to encourage people, no matter which party you vote for, we really mean that, you need to try to help democracy. You need to try to encourage politicians of all different stripes to be accountable. And so if you see something, say something. If you're seeing waste at the municipal level or something strange going on at the provincial level, or you're bothered by something in Ottawa, send that email, make that phone call. I've been that staffer in that office, taking that phone call and reading that email. And it really matters to elected representatives, because if they don't hear anything, they think everything's hunky-dory. But if they do hear something, a phone call or an email, they usually imagine that about 100 other people back home in their riding feel exactly the same way. And so if there's something bothering you, pick up that phone, write that email, sign that petition, because that's the only way you can truly affect real change between the gaps during the major elections. So take that action.
That's such good advice on fiscal matters, on moral, social issues that we're also concerned about. Freedom of speech. We often say freedom of speech, use it or lose it. And we live in a country where you are allowed to express yourself, at least up till now you are. And please do so. Let your representative know that you are concerned. Thanks, Kris, for that advice as well. And Peter, thanks for being with us today.
Well, thank you, Rod, and thank you, Kris, so much for your thoughts today. It's been great to have you, and keep up the good work. And we hope to talk again sometime. And thank you all for listening, and thank you all for watching. And join us again next week on another edition of CHP Talks. God bless.
God bless you all.